Okay, we're gonna get rolling. We're like passing PowerPoints back and forth, downloading, things are so close. So I'm gonna kick us off here today. So a couple of announcements. I don't even know if I'm in the camera right now because I don't have it up. So sorry for all you online people who got like a stomach shot right there. So we haven't seen you for a couple of months here, but I think a lot of you were at the picnic, so that's awesome. Take a moment to take that survey so you can help make next year better and give us some ideas for the winter event that we haven't had for a while. If you need to pay dues today, right here, Michaela will take your $20 for your family to pay your dues. And then, what was the other thing I was gonna say? I've forgotten my name.
The annual business meeting.
Oh, yes, and so I'm gonna say this now, it's September, you guys aren't thinking about this, but in December is our annual business meeting, and there are 2 officer roles that are going to be up for nominations and election. It's our vice president role, which Amber's been serving as our vice president, and our treasurer role, which Michaela served. And if you missed it all, we are switching so that every other year we elect, and it's a 2-year term, so that it's not 4 people leaving and 4 people coming all at once, because it's kind of chaos when we do it that way. So if you're interested in that or you want to think on that, now's your time to start thinking on that. Okay, Leslie, I know you're doing your thing back there with attendance and making all the magic happen, so this counts for your credit, but she's going to introduce our speaker tonight.
Just trying to pay attention to where you were on the camera, so we'll see if I'm in the shot. This is my wonderful friend, Stacy Schaffer. She's the founder and executive director of 31-8 Project, which is a nonprofit based here in Bismarck, North Dakota, that goes around the whole state of North Dakota to spread awareness and provide education about human trafficking here in North Dakota. And Stacy serves on a wide array of different committees and boards and different areas as well, and has over the years. Correct me, Stacy, how long has 31-8 Project been in existence?
Our birthday is on Thursday. It'll be 7 years.
7 years, but Stacy's been working in this field for more than 10 years. And I've known Stacy for at least 5 years now, and I've worked and volunteered with her organization. And so Stacy's going to touch on a very prevalent topic here tonight, because human trafficking is happening here in North Dakota. It has been happening here in North Dakota for years. And it's just becoming more and more prevalent, and it's becoming more prevalent in our foster kids as well. Some of us have had teenagers that have been trafficked come into our homes, and some have but haven't realized that that's maybe where some of their trauma has come from, is because of being not just sexually abused but specifically been trafficked. And so we want to provide some further education on that and some red flags, and answer a lot of your guys' questions so we can all be better aware and prepared to better serve and take care of the youth coming into our home. So warm welcome to my friend Stacy.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you all for having me here with you tonight. I apologize, I know I sound a little nasally. I'm finally getting over a cold, so bear with my voice a little bit. But it's always great to get out here and get to speak with a group of people. Something I do want to start with saying is some of the information I'm going to share, it can be a little bit hard to hear, and if at any point you feel triggered and you're like, hey, I just need to step out for a second, I respect that. That's not a problem. Know that some of the cases and the stories I'm sharing with you, I'm not doing that to try to intimidate you, to make you feel uncomfortable. That's not my intention, but I also want to be really realistic on what human trafficking looks like in North Dakota. I also want to say we're cramming a lot of material in a short time. So I teach a whole semester class at UMary on human trafficking. We spent 16 weeks on it. So we're going to condense that down to 45 minutes. But that's okay. I think we can get through it. So at any point, if you guys have questions, stop me. I'd rather answer the questions while we're having the conversation versus waiting till the end. I like to keep things a little bit informal. So like I said, just jump in at any time if you have a clarifying question or a statement, because this training needs to be beneficial to you. And I wanna make sure you walk away with some things that you didn't know before. So, as you heard, 31A project, we started back in,
It's gonna just take a second there, it's happening here.
gotcha, all right, perfect. So, I started my work in the anti-human trafficking movement in 2006. During that time, I was at the University of Mary, and I had a professor say, if you go to this guest speaker, you can get extra credit. And like many people, maybe, I liked extra credit. So I went to the speaker and he was talking about human trafficking. That led me over to Guatemala, where I dealt with my first case of human trafficking, a little girl named Anna. She was 8 years old at the time, and she was trafficked from a brothel in El Salvador to, she was taken from El Salvador to a brothel in Guatemala. While at that brothel, she was repeatedly sexually abused over and over again. Now, regardless of who you are or what your age is, this is gonna be a traumatic event, and it was for Anna. But fortunately, we were able to intervene, provide her with services, and today she lives a relatively normal life. So Anna is really my why behind the work I do. She is essentially a voice for the voiceless. So that's where 31A Project came from. 3 areas of focus. We're obviously doing the education piece tonight, but we also have a survivor mentorship program as well. So Jade and Joelle, who did provided us with food tonight, they are part of our survivor mentorship program as well. So we work with a variety of different survivors to try to help them reach their goals. And then we also have a bravery backpack program. So all of you parents out there, anytime you have a new kiddo that might be coming to your house, if you want to utilize these backpacks, you certainly can. Law enforcement came to us and they said, you know, sometimes we have to arrest a parent or a guardian in the middle of the night, and these kids have basically nothing to take with them. So can you put together a support bag? So we do this for ages, it was just 2 to 12, but we now recently expanded it 2 to 17. So just know that that is something in the community you can access.
And can I just say,
Yeah.
you can get them here
Yes,
at Evangel.
yeah, I mean, we could bring them here.
Don't we have them here?
That's Project Nightlight, yeah.
Yeah, so those are a little bit different, but those are great bags too, so utilize those. Yeah, these were just like really made for emergency purposes, so like EMTs, law enforcement, they carry them in their vehicles. So our goal with our short time together is really to look at what do we mean by this term human trafficking, what are some red flags associated with it, and where do you go with this information after today? So a lot of people don't believe that human trafficking exists in North Dakota, but we've heard that for a long time. Of course, during the oil boom, that brought to light human trafficking, but it's always been here. It's just the oil boom really brought it more to light. But here's a quote from one of our Homeland Security agents. Traffickers like to work underground. They don't necessarily want to work in big cities. They are drawn to small towns because they feel like they won't get caught. So areas that have a lot of agricultural farming, areas that have not a lot of law enforcement on patrol, those are areas that are also breeding grounds. Traffickers know that and they want to do some of their work there. So North Dakota is really unique because we're geographically large. So we don't have the largest population, but yet we have a lot of land that we're covering. So for law enforcement, it can be tricky to adequately patrol the whole state. So that's one factor there. We also border other states as well as another country. So it's easy to move people from place to place. Traffickers, when we talk about the sex trafficking side, can also make more on a sex act in North Dakota than they could selling someone in a different state for a different sex act. How is that possible? Well, in Atlanta, you might have a plethora of different people that are being trafficked. And we have a plethora of people in North Dakota, but we also have a large demand. And what I mean by that is buyers looking to solicit other people for sex acts. They are willing to pay more. So a sex act in Atlanta might be $30. That same sex act here in North Dakota, the trafficker could maybe charge $90. So that's why they see this area as a great area to do business in. So it kind of makes sense why it would be growing the way it is. The other thing though is that's been unique to North Dakota over the past year is we've had an increase of familial trafficking. So it's where the trafficking is happening by a family member. So I'll talk about some of those cases tonight too. So human trafficking is essentially selling a person for a good or service. If you want to break it down to the simple definition, it's selling a person for a good or service. Now, people can be trafficked in sex trafficking or labor trafficking. Sometimes it's both, right? So here's an example of how we've seen it before. So we had a situation, you've probably been following it a little bit too, with different massage parlors, right? So over the past couple of years, different massage parlors have been busted for sex trafficking. Well, you can also argue that there's labor trafficking happening in some of these situations too. So in some of the situations, the girls not only are forced to engage in sex acts with the customers that come in, but they're also forced to eat, sleep, and live in the room that they're engaging in that sex act, and their paychecks are withheld. So in those situations, it can be both sex and labor trafficking, but often it falls into one category or the other. The other thing we need to note here is a term called sexual exploitation. So we go into a lot of schools and we talk about sexual exploitation because it's super common and it can easily lead to human trafficking. So here's an example. Exploitation involves 2 people, or human trafficking involves 3 people. Exploitation, where we commonly see it, is, let's say we have a runaway child, they're mad at their family, whatever the case is, they meet somebody on the streets or an older individual online, that individual says, you can sleep on my couch, but in exchange, you have to engage in some type of sexual activity with me. Or I'll give you these drugs, but in exchange, you have to do X, Y, Z for me. So that is super common. We see that all the time here in Bismarck. Where it turns into trafficking is when we add the third party. So let's say you have this younger girl, she meets this older individual, and by older, maybe he's in his early 20s, late 20s, she's 14, 15 years old. All of a sudden, they're in love, they start dating, everything is wonderful, and she's going to his house all the time, and suddenly he tells her, I can't make rent this month on my apartment, and if I can't make rent, I'm having an absolute town. So if you want me to stay, what you could do is you could help me out, and by helping me out, I mean you could sleep with my friend just this one time, and then he said he would pay rent. And then that turns into multiple times over and over again. So we entered that third person, right? So again, exploitation is really the 2 people, and then human trafficking is when you enter that buyer into it as well. So that's the difference between the 2. Does that make sense to everybody? But this is so common, like it's been a huge problem in North Dakota, like we're doing just specific trainings now on exploitation because of how prevalent it is. But you can see how it quickly leads to human trafficking. So I grew up on a farm, I'm from Wishick, North Dakota, and I really appreciate the agricultural industry, but I'm not naive to the fact that the agricultural industry also sees labor trafficking. Construction companies, nail salons, and other organizations too, it's not limited to this. With sex trafficking, the number one way people are recruited and the number one way people are sold is online. So online social media, that's huge when we talk about human trafficking. There are other sectors though too. So 80% of the survivors we work with say that the individual who purchased them for a sex act brought a photo or a video of the sex act that they wanted done to them. So we know that pornography is playing a huge role now when we look at human trafficking as well. Some people have actually said it's a health epidemic when we talk about pornography usage now. Big modeling agencies, escort services, massage parlors, all avenues for sex trafficking to occur. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. It's basically all around us. It's just a matter of identifying it. So human trafficking brings in around $150 billion a year. Pretty big, large criminal industry. We estimate that there's around 40.3 million people enslaved in the world today, which is more than at the height of the transatlantic slave trade. Some people ask, why is that? Well, first off, it's easier to move people from place to place, right? The other thing is we have the highest population that we've ever had at any point of history. The third thing is people are seen as disposable. So back in the 1800s, 1700s, when we think back to the transatlantic slave trade, the average person, when adjusted with today's income, was sold anywhere for $40,000 to $80,000. Today, what do you think the average person is sold for? Any guesses? $90. So people are just seen as disposable, right? If I'm not getting what I need out of you, I can get access to somebody else. Why do you think a person might choose to sell a human being versus sell drugs? Right. So the average person is sold anywhere from 10 to 50 times a day in sex trafficking. So how I tell people to envision this, because some people are like, well, wouldn't that be amazing? And you're like, really? Think about the next 10 people that come through the door. It doesn't matter what they look like, who they are, what they smell like, you have to engage in some type of sexual activity. I think most of us would say after a while that might not be very fun anymore. So it's actually 5 to 40, I think it's on the next slide. But anyways, you can see why a person might choose to sell a human being versus sell drugs. But drugs definitely can play a big role in this. The reason we spend a lot of time talking to youth, sorry, guess I don't know how to use the clicker. The average age is around 12 to 14, in which someone is recruited into prostitution or a human trafficking act. That is a stat by Shared Hope International. The youngest case I've ever had was with a 3-year-old, and the oldest case I've ever had was somebody in their 50s. So this definitely can expand a pretty large demographic of who can be impacted by human trafficking. The 7 years life expectancy, the reason we say this is usually once somebody is brought into the life, that's what we refer to it as, there's many factors that are working against them. Not only are they being forced to engage in sexual activity every day, there's different illnesses, diseases, and often traffickers will use drugs as a way to recruit, but also in a way kind of hold someone prisoner. Like one of our survivors we work with, her trafficker got her addicted to heroin. And by doing that, she was at a point where she would physically get ill if she wasn't taking the heroin. And he knew that, so he used that to his advantage. So drugs can play a piece of this too. Labor trafficking does not get as much attention, and it should. It's very common, but it's very hard to identify. There's over 100 different visa statuses in the United States. Out of those visas, there's 3 main visas that we see a lot of that trafficking usually comes with it. That's the H-2A, the H-2B, and the J-1. North Dakota is in the top 10 states for bringing in the most people on the H-2A and the H-2B. So that's agricultural and non-agricultural work. Once people are brought in though on this visa program, whoever brings them in is in control of their visa. So if they mistreat them, they hold their wages, they have them living in horrible conditions, the person they brought in has to get permission from them in order to work for someone else. So you think if you're being abused by that person that they're necessarily gonna let you work for someone else? Probably not, right? So that's why labor trafficking is really difficult to detect within our state. I'm sorry, I know, and then I get like overly excited and then
It
I
must
feel
be
spicy.
like the internet, I wonder how it is for them because
Yeah.
of the videos slow.
Yeah, so that stat you saw before, 650, that's the number of cases that the North Dakota Human Trafficking Task Force has worked on since January 1st, 2016. That task force is made up of agencies like 31A, other service providers, law enforcement. Out of that number, 80% have been North Dakota residents. So I would argue that number is probably low, because realistically, if we were working with everybody that was being brought into the state and then taken out of the state, that number would probably be much higher. So those are just the cases we've worked on. Any questions yet? I get very passionate and I throw out a lot of information sometimes, so I'm like, yeah.
I'm just remembering from the Freedom Walk, there was a statistic that only 1% of people in trafficking will ever be rescued. So if only 1% are rescued and 650 is what we've actually seen,
Yeah.
the number that's actually in our state is significantly higher than.
Absolutely, yes. Yep, it's much more prevalent than that number. I know sometimes even saying that number, I don't love saying it because it's like the number is just so much higher. Yep. So victim identification. Who are the victims? Do you have a vulnerability? Traffickers look for people's vulnerabilities. We all have a vulnerability. So we'll say anyone can realistically be a victim of human trafficking, but a trafficker is looking for certain characteristics when they are trying to traffic someone. If I can get this to maybe change. See, first I get aggressive, then not aggressive enough.
Which slide am I supposed to be on? I clicked off of it, I messed you up.
Oh no, it's all good. Just the next one. But as you get there, so I often tell like the kids that we work with, so low self-esteem, lack of social safety net, homeless or runaway, the number one thing people are looking for is a desire to be loved and or respected. If they're not getting at that at home, they will seek it out somewhere else. How about what I post online? If I post online, my life sucks, my parents don't get me, I have no friends. If I'm a trafficker, you have now opened the door for me to engage in a conversation with you and tell you, you know, you're right, you don't need your parents, you don't need those friends, I'll be your friend. So what we post online, we gotta be really cautious about that. So those are just a few things a trafficker might look for. 70 to 90% of the people we work with have experienced some type of childhood sexual abuse. So sexual abuse is very common in these situations. Just because somebody might identify as someone in one of these boxes does not necessarily mean that they're going to be a victim of human trafficking, right? But again, it could make them more susceptible to becoming a victim. Immigration status, isolation, all those different factors can play a role. And then 3 out of 4 victims, we estimate, this is from Thorn, are trafficked online. So I guess just to give kind of another case example too, so we had a case where there was a girl here in Bismarck, 8th grader, and she was actually in the foster care system, I believe at the time, this has been several years ago. And she was befriended by somebody older online, you know, said she was beautiful, that he wanted to date her, and in a couple of weeks they were dating. Now all of a sudden she got these messages from different modeling agencies across the US saying, if you can get to our locations, we're gonna have a job for you. So she went to her boyfriend, who was in his early 20s, and said, you know, do you think these are credible? And he's like, yeah, I do, and in fact, I'd be willing to drive you to these places. So they arranged that he was gonna pick her up after school one day, and that they were gonna take off out of town. Sure enough, he did that. They headed out of town, she was reported missing. Highway Patrol found them in South Dakota and brought them back. Who do you think that boyfriend was, though? He was a trafficker who had created multiple fake accounts on Instagram to try to lure young females in. So again, who are we talking to online? The other thing I often share with students too is when we post photos or we share photos of our body parts. Just because our face isn't in it does not mean that that can't be tracked to us. Because what's interesting is every single photo has a unique ID number with it, right? And the reason that was created for when kids would go missing or run away. So we can now pin that photo to you and you can get in trouble for things like the distribution of pornography. So we make sure that kids understand that. What does that mean when I click send on that photo? The other thing that we're running into, we've had quite a few scenarios in Bismarck where you have a couple, a boy and a girl, they're madly in love, they exchange a lot of photos, right? Nude photos. And all of a sudden, down the road, they break up. And one is mad at the other one, and then they sell these photos to a website, typically not ran by the United States. My most recent one, it was ran by Russia. And they were making money off these photos, even though the girl was underage, and they had no intention of bringing the photos down. So that's another thing, like, to talk to kids about too, is like, we're gonna do whatever we can to try to get those videos down, those photos down, but most of these apps and websites are not ran by the United States. They're ran by other countries, which limits our jurisdiction. So just things to, talk to kids about, of like, this is real. I mean, we're gonna do everything we can. We don't want this to follow you around the rest of your life, but we're also limited sometimes of what we're able to do. So just a few things to keep in mind. Traffickers, anyone can be a trafficker. Before I moved back to North Dakota, I was on the Minnesota Human Trafficking Task Force, and we actually had a trafficker who had somehow found this young girl and had falsified documentation posing as her father and had her go into schools to try to recruit for him. So those things really do happen. So ask questions of when a child's going to a sleepover, who are they staying with? You heard me say familial trafficking is the number one type of trafficking, or the number one type of trafficking we see in North Dakota right now. Here's a case example. We had 2 parents that were separated, and the weekends the daughter was with the dad. He decided to see how much money he could make selling his daughter to his friends for sexual acts. He made a lot of money, and he decided to start selling her online. So again, that's when she was in middle school. Those things happen. It's so common. It's just way more common than we want to believe. So just know it's there, it's prevalent. We need to have these tough conversations. 50% of people are trafficked by someone they know. So I know we think it's the person driving the white van wearing the hoodie, because that's what students often tell me, but that's very rare. Kidnapping is very rare in North Dakota. Like, does that happen in places? It does, but that's not the number one way we're seeing people taken here. Online is gonna be that number one way. So recruitment and control. Why don't people just leave? We get asked that all the time. And if it's your family member, do you think that makes it tricky to leave? Absolutely. It just adds another layer of difficulty. So recruitment, yes, it can be online, but it can happen at schools, malls, shelters, team parties, social media. The big craze right now is like sugar daddy and sugar babies. Are you guys familiar with that? Maybe a little bit. So right now they're really targeting young girls, even sometimes young guys too. Guys can be trafficked too. It's just we see more cases of females. So I do want to do that disclaimer. But what they're selling is, we can hook you up with a sugar daddy if you're willing to be a sugar baby, and they can help pay for your college. They will let you go on a spring break trip, and you can have this amazing life. You may or may not have to sleep with them. So there's literally conferences you can go to right now that will train you how to be a sugar baby. I was just talking at a school in Killdeer last year, and I got done, and this little 8th grade boy ran up to me, and he literally had an ad on his Instagram account to be a sugar baby. So, I mean, at an 8th grade level, you're starting to think about those things because it's popping up on your social media. So, again, just things for us to think about. Okay, I gave that case example. Just some signs that you should look for. A person might have one sign, they might have multiple signs. That's what's tricky about human trafficking, but a few things to think about. Let's say you have a child and they are very happy, they're outgoing, and all of a sudden you notice a change in their demeanor, who they're talking to. And you notice that all of a sudden their grades start to suffer. They're hardly attending classes, but yet they have a lot of new items. So maybe new shoes, they're getting their nails done. Things like that are usually indicators of who are you hanging out with to get those items, but why is your mood all of a sudden shifted? You might notice that they start hanging out with a particular person who's distancing them from their friends and family. So slowly they can only hang out with that person and nobody else. Those are signs that something seems a little off here. Lacks control of his or ID. So traffickers, a lot of times for control, will take ID or passports, again, just a way of control. Eye contact. Now, culturally, in some cultures, it is seen as a sign of disrespect to look someone in the eyes, but it can also be a sign of trafficking. Traffickers use eye contact as a way of control. So one of the survivors we work closely with, she was not allowed to look anybody in the eye. And if she did, she got disciplined for it. So eye contact can be a big thing. So those are just a few things to look for. Like, you're really looking, is there a sudden change in their demeanor? What is causing that change? The other thing too, electronics, I would highly recommend not allowing electronics in the room at night. So we actually had a case this past year. This started when this girl was an 8th grader. This guy out of a different state, I can't say all the details because it's currently going on, but in a different state, had created over 50 different fake profiles to try to engage with different girls throughout a variety of different states. And he got to the point that he controlled their behavior so much that he would watch them sleep at night through FaceTime. And this one girl did this for 4 years, and parents had no idea that literally on her computer, or sometimes her phone, this guy was watching her sleep every night, and nobody really ever checked or thought anything about it. So just be cautious of, are you letting those electronics in the room, and then what are your rules about electronics? Here's just a few apps to know about. The calculator app, if you notice that there's 2 calculator apps on a phone, it is quite likely that one is being held to hold photos, and usually it is pornographic photos. So know that. We had a case last year in Bismarck where there was someone in high school who had pictures of a 6th grader hidden in that folder. So again, ask those questions, look at people's phones, especially your children. What a trafficker does to control a victim, sorry, making sure I'm not going too long. I wish I could say it was just easy to walk out of the life, right? And it's not. Some of our survivors, they have children with their traffickers, that can play a part. Like I said, a family member. We had one situation where a trafficker threatened, I'm gonna hurt your brother or sister if you tell anybody. In that particular situation, she would go out in the middle of the night while everyone was sleeping to meet him, and he would pimp her out, is what happened. And how it all got started is she was drugged at a party, they took photos of her, and then her dad was a pretty prominent person in the community and said, we will show your dad these photos. And she was so scared of her dad, like she loved her dad so much and never wanted him to be ashamed of her, that she was willing to do whatever she could so he would never see those photos of her. So those things happen. So okay, now you're like physically and psychologically being controlled. Not in North Dakota, but there's still laws in some states where at the age of 14 you can be arrested for prostitution. So instead of asking questions of why would a young girl be out on the street engaging in that type of activity, they're being arrested. So that law changed in North Dakota in 2015 due to safe harbor laws. But it's a real issue. Their traffickers will tell them no one's gonna believe you if you try to get help. They're just gonna laugh at you. We've had some survivors where they go to tell a friend, this is what's happening to me, and the friend responds by, you deserve it. So again, how we respond to people makes a difference. So the best advice I can give you is have open conversations with your kids. Let them know they can come to you for anything, that you're gonna be there. There might be some repercussions, but you're gonna be there and you wanna be engaged in what's happening in their life. Because if you're not, someone else will find a way in. So you just gotta be really cautious on that. Trauma bonding and Stockholm syndrome, it's literally rewiring the brain. It's so hard to overcome trauma bonding. That is our biggest thing. And a lot of our survivors we work with is they say, we can handle the bruising, we can handle the beatings, what we can't handle is the mind. That's the biggest obstacle to overcome. Victims have a fear and distrust. A lot of the survivors we work with, it takes them time to trust us, and I don't blame them, right? Like they have every reason to not trust us. So you have to really develop that rapport. And then of course, like for juveniles, a lot of times they are seen as prostitutes. That's what they're called. And so they begin to think that's what I am. And so we have to change that narrative. So all reasons why it can be difficult. And then when you do leave the life, it's difficult. You might not have any family or social support. You might have a record, a criminal record. So now it's difficult. One survivor we work with got more time in jail than her trafficker. Not a great system in those situations, right? So we're working on how do we change that. But so now here, this lady is trying her best to like get a job and be involved in the community, but yet she can't, but yet her trafficker can, you know, so those are problems. I always tell too, like faith-based communities, if somebody walks into your congregation, your job is not to judge them. They might not dress like you or look like you, but you have no idea what they're going through. So maybe instead of judging, ask questions, like how are you, how can we help you, we're glad you're here, those types of things. Transportation is also very tricky. And then empathy from the community. Like again, a lot of times the community sees, oh, that's just a prostitute versus, no, that's actually a survivor. So how we phrase things. It's also very difficult for survivors to speak in front of people. So we sat down with a group of survivors and just said, what are some things you want people to know? And here were a few quotes. Think about things from our point of view. Never say you understand because you haven't been there, but still try to put yourself in our shoes. Language counts, the words you use make a difference. Calling us prostitutes hurts us. We may act hard, but we have to have the wall for survival. Deep down, we know we need help, and we need more information about your services. And one of our survivors recently said, and never give up on us. So we're gonna test you to see if we can trust you before we're gonna tell you the truth of what's going on. So it might take 10 times before I trust you, but once I trust you, I'm gonna be ready to tell you what's going on. So really developing that relationship is so important. And then I just have a few more things and then I'll open it up for questions. But other ways you can help as you move forward, continue to educate yourself. We have lots of great resources. If you're like, how do I even start this conversation with my child? We can send you different talking points just to help you. If your kid's a gamer, there's a game called Interland where they can learn about human trafficking at their level. So there's so many great resources. I have a picture of it as well in our next slide. Host filming discussions that involve human trafficking. Maybe you're part of a book club, your next book is on human trafficking. If you're, depending where you work, what's your policy when it comes to dealing with human trafficking cases? Here were a few of the resources. So In Pursuit of Love is a really great book by Rebecca Bender. So if you're a reader, I would recommend that on the sex trafficking side. For youth, there's something called Good Pictures and Bad Pictures. There's 2 different editions. That's a great way of addressing the conversation of pornography. The average age of first exposure for males to pornography right now is between ages 6 and 8. So you want to try to get ahead of that of like, what are good pictures to view? What are bad pictures to view? And you can start that at a young age by having that conversation. And then labor trafficking. Don't forget about it. Trafficked in America is a good one, just evaluating like chicken farms, how they've utilized slave labor. So it's all around us. And then Interland. I do have brochures as well as indicator cards for you guys too, with a little bit more information at the end. And then here are the items that are in our backpacks for ages 2 to 12. And we just got the grant for ages 13 to 17. So we're making that list now. But if you're in need of any of those items, that's what we have inside those backpacks. Okay. And then, of course, what we tell people, if you do ever suspect human trafficking, like let's say you're at a store and you notice something just seems strange in front of you with these 2 people, we ask you not to engage because traffickers, they don't care about the people they're trafficking, they're not gonna care about you. So what we ask is write down everything you see. Do they have a certain tattoo? Do they have a birthmark? What color car did they go into? What license plate number? Write all those factors down, and then we encourage you to call law enforcement. If it's an emergency, there's 911. But if you don't wanna call law enforcement, we also have a tip line. So you can use that tip line to report as well. And sometimes it's as broad as, I noticed that the yellow house on our street has activity all hours of the day where there's people coming and going in and out of the house. Sometimes it's as broad as that, but it can warrant BCI to actually go over to that house and see what's going on. So it's not bad to do those tips. We also have the National Human Trafficking Hotline, but I am going to warn you a little bit on this. So last year there was a lot of conspiracy theories that came out about human trafficking. And because of that, the hotline got inundated with a lot of false calls. And so right now it's taking sometimes 2 to 3 months to get to certain tips that are being reported. So I would recommend you report it locally before accessing the hotline, and hopefully eventually it'll get back to normal. And then as we wrap up, and like I said, I'm happy to answer any questions, but I know that this topic is heavy and sometimes you feel a little bit exhausted, like where do we go from here and what do we do, right? But I want you to know there's gotta be a silver lining, right? That just by being here and getting more information, you're truly helping us to raise awareness on human trafficking. So no one can do everything, but everyone can do something, and by taking time to be here, you are doing something. So thank you guys for that. I'd be happy to open it up for any questions. If you guys, I wanted to save some time for questions if you have any.
Well, first of all, thank you.
Yes, Yeah, it's all right, I know, I like share, so I can't help it, I just have so much I want to say.
Is Craigslist and Backdoor still prevalent with?
Craigslist is, so Backpages was shut down. Yep, so Backpages was shut down. I Am Jane Doe though is a great documentary if you're curious of how Backpages worked. But there are similar sites like Backpages now, like there's iBackpages, way to be creative, I know. And then some other sites out there that are very similar. Backpages, the reason that was really, like, we were able to shut that down was because it was based in the United States, where a lot of these other websites are based in other countries. So that's why you continuously see them popping up.
Well, I worked with a lady and her husband drugged her and trafficked her basically, and through Backpage and Craigslist and stuff. And so I was working with her to get her the services. Her kids were taken away and she was put on the sex offender list and the whole works, and it's like, you know,
Yeah,
she felt like she was the victim, and she was. I mean, she didn't ask for it.
Yep.
She didn't realize he did this because she was so out of it.
Yep.
And this type of thing, but I mean, she paid more consequences than he did.
yeah.
And she was going for teaching, and she'd already gone through 2 years of college, and she could no longer continue.
Yeah.
Because she couldn't get a job in North Dakota.
We're working, I think we're gonna see that a lot, this legislative session, of just reviewing how are our laws set and how do we do a better job of protecting victims. Yeah, it's unfortunate.
So you talked about kind of the North Dakota task force and things getting shut down that we have control over within the United States.
Yeah.
Is there an international task force that's kind of looking at some of this stuff to see if there's ways to shut things down in other countries?
Yeah, so in 2000, there was something called the Trafficking in Persons Report that was established through the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. And so what that report is, it comes out every June, and it's ran by the United States, so there's some people that have mixed feelings about it, but they evaluate every country in the world, and they rate them on a tier system. So if they're rated tier 1, it means they're complying with the standards that the US has set forth regarding how to combat human trafficking. Then there's tier 2, there's tier 2 watch list, and tier 3. Once you hit the tier 2 watch list and tier 3, you're subject to certain sanctions. So like, let's say we have a certain trade agreement with you, or we're providing you some type of support, we can say we're gonna take that support back and not help you. Some countries that are not fans of the United States purposely, I think, just don't do anything, because it's almost like, well, we don't care what you have to say. But then for others that do, you've seen a change within some of those countries. But that would be probably the biggest thing that we see, is that Trafficking in Persons report. And that's released every June. So. Any other questions? And if you think of them, like in the future, please don't hesitate to reach out. Or if you're like, hey, I have this situation going on, I'm not entirely sure, but I think it could be potentially a trafficking situation, we'll hook you up with the right resources. Through the task force, we have something called navigators. We have 3, we have one in the east, one in the west, and one centrally located. And their job is really to pull together resources if we believe someone's in a potential human trafficking situation. So we do have a protocol set.
I just would encourage all parents to go through your kids' phones tonight. I'm very pro going through my children's phones, even my 25-year-old no, but this, my 16-year-old that was here, absolutely. And just because I'm like, be safe. But she had to kick out because a friend had told her to download it, and they attempted to traffic her.
Yeah.
She was a 5th grader. And like, it's a federal case, like if he ever enters the US, they tracked him to Morocco.
Yeah.
You know, and it's scary because you don't think it's gonna happen to your child. And the stuff he was sending her and the questions he was asking her
Yeah.
were horrible. And if she'd have given her information out to him, she probably would have been grabbed, but she didn't. That was the only thing that probably kept her safe, is she wouldn't tell him school.
Yeah.
Or stuff like that.
You brought up 2 cases that just came into my head that happened this past year. So we had a case in Williston where there was a high schooler who started talking to someone from Montana online and said how she wanted to run away. He actually showed up at their house, her parents' house, but he was extremely intoxicated on a variety of drugs, passed out in the driveway, and the parents called law enforcement. But his intent is they had met online. And then the other example I give, I had a little 6th grade boy, and he was playing roadblocks, and we were talking about, what might make you feel uncomfortable with social media. And he said, yeah, it was weird. This guy started talking to me, and he asked me what my age is, where I live, what I look like. But then he said something strange, and I knew something was weird. He said, you're cute. And I don't think I'm cute, so I thought that was weird. And I was like, okay, interesting, but you just gave all this information, right? You just literally gave all this information out, and your concern was you don't see yourself as cute, and he said you're cute. So that's why you thought it was strange. So yes, so looking through phones, but having that conversation of what information do you give out versus.
Not only that, but on their phones, they also have where people can track where they are.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Which,
Snapchat.
and
You
you
tell them, shut that off.
So I'm glad you said that. There's 2 videos. Check out our YouTube channel or our website. We worked with a group of students this year in Bismarck, and we created a PSA for kids and then a PSA for parents on how to access social media in a safe way. So definitely check those out. I didn't show them tonight because I think it would have been hard with the technology.
Are those on your site then?
Yes, they're on our Facebook page, or sorry, on our website. Yes, yeah. But yeah, it's both kids and parents need to be informed. And the problem is right now, oftentimes kids understand the technology better than the parents do. And so you gotta get in front of that in some shape or form. So,
There's a really good parental monitoring app called Bark.
Yeah.
That you can subscribe to, so if you don't know the lingo, it monitors it for you. You have to put it on your phone. But I don't have to know what certain acronym means. Bark tells me I should be concerned this is about drugs or alcohol or sex or whatever.
Yep.
I didn't, until I got a middle schooler, I didn't know I needed this app in my life.
yes, that's a good, Bark does, and even if you follow them on Facebook or their website, they always have a lot of good tips that they're posting.
M-Spy was supposed to be another one. That's
It's
one of
possible.
the psychiatrists told me M-Spy is.
Okay, yep. I know there's a lot of different filters, so it's kind of finding which one works best for you too. And if you're on a budget, some cost more and some are free. So it's also figuring out kind of what works for you. Okay, well, yeah, thank you again for having me, and feel free to grab one of your first.